Good morning, everyone out there on YouTube. My name is John Breyault. I am the Vice President of Public Policy, Telecommunications, and Fraud with the National Consumers League. NCL is America's oldest consumer advocacy organization, and we're based in Washington, D.C. And today we are extremely honored to welcome all of you to our special event on COVID-19 scams and how particularly consumers in Iowa can spot them and avoid them. We are honored this morning to be joined by Attorney General Tom Miller from Iowa. I don't think that General Miller needs any introduction, but if by chance you have not heard of him before, he is America's longest serving Attorney General. He was first elected in 1979. He is the 33rd Attorney General of Iowa, and he's currently serving in his 10th term. General Miller, welcome to our event.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all your work on consumer issues. Your organization has been, such a stalwart on dealing with consumer issues for a long time. And we have a great relationship with you and your organization, and of course with other attorney generals' offices, and the ability to work together has always been very helpful to everybody.
Great, that's so great to hear, and thank you for saying that. General Miller, I was doing a little bit of I'm a history buff, and so working for an organization like mine, we were founded in 1899. So I went back and I looked to see.
I wasn't Attorney General then.
Well, who was Attorney General was a man by the name of Milton Renly. He was the Attorney General, and I looked, and in one of his first reports from the Attorney General's office, he was talking about consumer protection. And in particular, he was writing a letter to the Secretary of the Board of Health talking about the need for inspections of illuminating oils for consumers. And at the time, illuminating oils were things like gasoline, naphtha, and benzene. So times have changed a little bit, but I think your office's commitment to consumer protection certainly hasn't. So thank you for all the work that you've been doing on behalf of consumers in Iowa and across the country.
Well, thank you. Thank you. A wonderful Attorney General and a great friend of mine, Larry Scalise, in 1965, sort of formalized the Consumer Protection Division in the Attorney General's office, and we've taken off from there.
Great. Well, so let's jump right into our topic of the day, which are these scams that are affecting consumers across the country, but particularly in Iowa, and these scams are related to our ongoing COVID-19 crisis. As I'm sure you're aware, there has been a dramatic spike in complaints from consumers in Iowa regarding these scams. Can you talk a little bit about what your office is seeing and what you're doing to protect Iowans from these scams during this time?
Initially, we saw a huge amount of complaints concerning price gouging. That in a situation like this, where some goods are relatively precious, that wouldn't be in other situations, and there's a run on those goods, price gouging becomes a real problem. And we had a number of people in our Consumer Protection Division work on that, and we got the complaints, we tracked them down, we jawboned the retailers and the people that were doing it. We had people watching social media to pick up on whoever was doing it in that way. Filed a lawsuit against an operator in Northwest Iowa that was doing that. But over time, have gotten pretty good compliance with people and have gotten a lot of money returned in those circumstances. Then we've seen some problems where people have prepaid for or paid a down payment on a trip or a concert or something like that, and have worked hard to get their money back. And sometimes that's gone pretty well. Other times it's taken more time. Also, we've seen some scams in terms of products. Claims about masks that were deceptive, claims about remedies and cures that were false. You've got to expect that in this situation, and our expectations unfortunately were met, and we're dealing with that. And also, as I mentioned before, just in reference, we have a wonderful relationship with the other 49 attorney generals, and work together on these issues, share information, do joint projects So try to present a united front and always believe that as a group we can do more than we could individually.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned the coordination that happens with among the state attorneys general. As I'm sure you know, a lot of these scammers are based outside, certainly outside Iowa, but also outside the United States. And so coordination among groups of attorneys general is really critical to tackling those scams. You know, at Fraud, we run a website called fraud.org, and we hear complaints from consumers all the time about a whole variety of scams. But in particular, what we've been seeing since this COVID crisis began has been consumers who are in financial distress. So, you know, 40 million people are out of work. We just saw reports this morning that said another 1.5 million have filed unemployment claims. And we know that scammers will look for people who are in financial distress to try and get them, you know, take away their last dollar, as the former chairman of the FTC once said. You know, in Iowa in particular, I know we've seen warnings from the Iowa Utilities Board, who's been talking about scammers calling Iowans, threatening to shut off their electricity in 30 minutes unless they paid up. You know, and as I can imagine, somebody who's trying to put, you know, just keep the lights on and put, you know, bread on the table, that can be really scary. What would you say to Iowans who are wondering how to stay safe from scammers while they're struggling to make ends meet during this difficult economic time?
Yeah. Well, you make a very important point that scammers are aware of what's happening around us and around them. That they're aware of what's happening in the country. They're aware of what's hot, what people are interested in, where people are suffering, and they move their scams to deal with those situations. You know, you mentioned the utility scam, which became fairly common. You described it well. A call, we're going to shut you off in 30 minutes unless you you know, get us the money by credit card or some other way. People should know that the utilities never make that kind of demand. What they do is they'll do in writing, and you know, they've had some flexibility. Also, you know, and by the governor's executive order, nobody could be shut off for a period of time in Iowa. And if you get a call from someone saying they're from the utility, you know, hang up and call the utility and ask them what the situation is, and let them know that kind of call is being made, and maybe let us know. You know, the big things are to protect consumers. The practices remain the same. That if you get an unsolicited call, be very, very suspicious. Almost always that unsolicited call is going to be fraudulent, or something you don't want anyway, even if it's not a fraud. So be very, very, very skeptical when it's unsolicited. And when they rush you to judgment, you got to do it right now. That's an enormous warning signal to back off and not do it, and think about it, and perhaps talk to someone. And the talk to someone is really important. That if people are asking for money from somebody you have know nothing about, you know, take some time to talk to your children, or talk to your banker, or someone you know that knows finances. This is a particularly difficult time for some seniors in long-term care, because they're isolated for health reasons, but they still have the phone. They still have the cell phone. They can call their family, their advisors, their friends, and be sure and do that. And also, one other trademark warning signal is sort of playing on your emotions. There's the various imposter scams. There's the grandparent scam, where the grandchild is in trouble and you need money right away. And even romance. There's sort of the romance scam. So, you know, when they're dealing with your emotions and pressing you on the emotions, that's another warning signal to say, hey, wait a second, I need to back up and think about this and talk to somebody.
Yeah, and you know, I can't agree with you more about the need to lean on, you know, don't be afraid to lean on your support network. especially during this time. I mean, when so many of us are socially isolated, particularly seniors, we really want to underline the importance of reaching out to friends, to family, to loved ones or trusted advisors, to make sure that they help you think this through before you get snagged in. And unfortunately, the scammers know this too. We hear from consumers on practically a daily basis who give us really heartbreaking stories about scammers calling them and literally keeping them on the phone while they drive to Walmart or Target or somewhere to wire them money. So I couldn't agree with you more about the need to sort of step back and say, whoa, wait a minute, let's stop and think about it. I'd like to sort of turn a little bit to something else you talked about, which was the imposter scams. When the president first announced the CARES Act stimulus package, and said that every American is going to be getting a $1,200 check, we were worried that scammers were going to take advantage of that, and they did. We've seen reports of millions, at least, of dollars getting intercepted by the scammers, and now we're hearing about a second round of stimulus that's going to come out, and I think we're trying to figure out how do we avoid that happening again. But I think, the answer for most consumers too is going to be the importance of, if you've been approached by one of these or you've been a victim of one of these scams, that they should report it. If you're speaking to Iowans who have been approached by one of these scams or, God forbid, been a victim of one, what would you tell them to do? Where should somebody like that go to try not only to protect themselves, but also help protect others?
Yeah. Well, there's a number of places that they can go. They can go to, of course, go to our office. If they've been, if they've actually lost the money, they can go to law enforcement. Our law enforcement really tries to work hard. They can contact the FTC. They can contact Better Business. Sometimes contact the media, particularly early on, if they haven't heard of this scam. The media, the television stations in particular, will pick up and do a story. But it's really important to report it and for the word to get out, because education, warning is so much better than trying to recover the money. If you can, prevention is just so much better than the cure, the enforcement. If we can get word out to people, that just helps everybody. And one of the things I've thought about, and Brad Anderson's going to be on later, I think, with AARP, they do a good job of getting word out on the basic scams, the Social Security scam, the imposter scam, the grandparent scam. We do too. We work hard at that. And I'm just thinking, is there a way that we could have sort of an early warning system on the new scam of that size and type? And get word out as we get a few complaints in, as AARP gets a few complaints in, and like I said, I think they and we and others, get the basic scams out to people and give good warning. But if there's a way we can move it a little bit earlier, maybe you have some ideas and can work with us for an early warning system. I think that would be very beneficial.
Well, I don't know if you meant to do that, but you certainly teed up something that we do at NCL that we're very proud of. Every month we do a fraud alert email based on complaints that we receive and other sort of new twists on old scams that we see popping up. And that's designed to do exactly that, to try and get ahead of the scammers and warn people about these before, a new scam blows up into something. So if anybody's, sorry to plug myself, but if anybody is interested in that, they can sign up for those alerts at www.fraud.org. I'd like to just ask you a little bit about the role that technology is playing in all of this. Obviously, the scammers are very tech savvy and using that to their advantage. But also in combating COVID-19, there is a role for technology to play sort of at all levels, and from warning to consumers to spotting the trends to sort of blocking some of these malicious attempts by scammers to spam people's inboxes or do robocalls. when it comes to combating these scams, what do you see as the role that the technology companies in Iowa and elsewhere should play?
Well, you're right. The technology companies have just immense power and authority in a lot of ways. And a lot of these things are done through technology. Although, many of them are done the old way by the landline is a way that telemarketing fraud still is common. It's particularly targeted at elderly because they're home more often. They're more likely to have a landline. They're more likely to spend time. But on the technology side, yeah, there are things they can do by blocking, by screening, by alerts, by cooperating with us when we have a lead and a question. They certainly can do that. The flip side there that we have to be a little bit careful about is privacy. As they get more sophisticated in what they're doing to block things and deal with things, some privacy concerns come in. But those are things that we can work through and talk to them about.
Great. Well, one of the issues that we run into sometimes with consumers is that they're afraid, right? And they're particularly among seniors, we see this a lot, but also among others. They're afraid that if they talk about being a victim of fraud, that they will, maybe lose their financial independence or be embarrassed. And so they don't report it. They don't share that information with others. And frankly, we know that scammers depend on that to try and continue to defraud people. And we've heard some really, really heartbreaking stories about people losing life savings because they can't get out of this cycle. What would you say to Iowans who maybe have been victims of these frauds and just are afraid? Is that something that your office can help with? Are there sort of elder support or senior support services in Iowa that folks can lean on to help them during these times? And I think this is something not just for seniors themselves, but for their caregivers who often see their loved ones being victims of these fraud and may not know what to do.
Yeah. Well, my saying is, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I think that people that speak out about these frauds, particularly speak out early, are really heroes. And we all get fooled. I mean, nobody is smart enough or alert enough all the time not to be taken. And also the fraudsters are very sophisticated and extremely persistent in trying. So people shouldn't be embarrassed. They should think they're doing a service, that they're a hero in speaking out. And that's what that we always encourage. And also, I think we have to be careful of not putting people in jeopardy of their financial independence. If they do speak out, have to be sensitive to that and be reassuring on that. It is hard. Human nature is such that it's hard to admit a mistake, and some of us are a little better than others at that. But it's difficult for everybody. But admitting a mistake is something that well, everybody makes mistakes. People have to understand that, and admitting mistakes helps yourself, and in this case can help a lot of others. We do run into situations where people are repeat victims from the same company, and then other companies who buy the names from the original company. And we caution people to not hold on too long, and not be too tied to thinking you're right or being reluctant to say you're wrong, particularly to your family. Those are difficult, delicate situations that we try and help with.
Great. I think that's such an important message, General Miller. We are really, really honored that you have taken time. I know that this is an incredibly busy time for your office during normal times, much less during a global pandemic. So we really appreciate you being a part of today's event, to helping us raise awareness about these scams that are costing consumers in Iowa and across the country literally billions of dollars. So before we let you go, I just want to say thank you, number one, on behalf of NCL and my boss, Sally Greenberg. And also offer you, is there any sort of closing remarks that you would like to provide to folks who are listening in now, or who may be watching this video later in Iowa or across the country?
Yeah, 2 points. One is that, you're kind to give me some compliments, and that's appreciated. Everybody likes compliments, but the people that do the work are our Consumer Protection Division, and they're just a spectacular group of people that deserve a lot of credit. Jessica Whitney is the wonderful leader. Nathan Blake is the deputy that works with her, and it's a group of people that are just very committed to these issues and to the public. We believe that the great thing about the Attorney General's office is that we have the ability to use the law to serve ordinary people. And that's never more true than in consumer protection. They do that. They live these issues. They work with people. They care for people, and they deserve some credit. And thanks to your organization for all you do and for putting this together. This is important. And finally, to the public, we're all in this together, and we all care for each other and want nobody to be abused, to lose their money, and sometimes the consequences are well beyond money. So be alert yourself, be alert in terms of your family members and people and if you are defrauded, don't be embarrassed. Do something about it, and be sure that people like our Consumer Protection Division and your organization and others care about what's happening and care about you.
Great. Well, General Miller, again, thank you very, very much for being here today, for participating in this event, and for helping us really get the message out about this. So I will let you get back to work now, and then I will invite our expert panel to join us in just a moment here. General Miller, thank you again for everything that you do.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for what you do.
Appreciate it. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Hello and welcome back. Brad and Beth, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Can you hear me, John?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. So welcome back, everyone. We just concluded a really amazing conversation with Attorney General Miller, and now we are very excited to move to the second half of our program today. We are honored to be joined by Brad Anderson, who is the State Director for AARP Iowa, as well as Beth Townsend, who is the Director of Iowa Workforce Development. I won't go into sort of their entire bios. You can find that online. But I will say that we are really lucky to be joined by two folks in Iowa who I think are some of the leading experts when it comes to thinking about fraud as it relates to COVID-19. So Brad and Beth, welcome to the panel.
Thank you for doing this, John. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and thank you for making time on a what I know is a very busy Thursday morning. Let's just jump into this. This is going to be sort of a free-flowing discussion, and I encourage you all to kind of feel free to jump in whenever you want. But Brad, I'm going to direct the first question to you. AARP is really one of the organizations that's on the front line of fighting back against scams targeting consumers in Iowa. Can you tell me a little bit about what the data that you're seeing at AARP is telling you about what's happening on the ground with these scams?
Yeah, you bet. We are definitely on the front lines. And first, I want to start off by saying, we really appreciate the work that you do at NCL and for putting this event together, because here's the thing. We were going to, believe it or not, launch our most ambitious Fraud Watch tour ever in February with the Attorney General's office. So we had 57 events across the state of Iowa planned to really protect Iowans from consumer fraud. And then, of course, the virus came and the tour got canceled. So I just appreciate you for raising these issues, because anything we can do to get the word out is something, that we aim to do. We did in 2019, so late last year, we did a survey across the state of Iowa to figure out, okay, what are some of the things that are happening on the ground? And we wanted to get kind of a sense of how people are feeling and reacting to fraud, and specifically how many people have gotten scammed. And so it was kind of interesting. Some of the results that I pulled were, number one, 66% of the Iowans, the 50 plus Iowans that we pulled, were afraid of getting scammed, at some point during their life. And 9% of the people that we polled actually had gotten scammed in just the last 12 months. But, something that Attorney General Miller said that was really important was 57% of that 9% that got scammed didn't report it. And, he talks about human nature and kind of being embarrassed about reporting. And I think that's real. And I think people need to know that the more they report it, and the more proactive they are about reporting scams, the more that they can protect others from being scammed. And finally, one interesting data point that we had was we asked, okay, so will the IRS ever call or email you and request personal or financial information? 14% of the people that were polled either said yes or we don't know. And so there is still education that we need to do to make sure people understand that the IRS will never call you, right? They will never email, and they will never text you. And so again, thank you for the work that you're doing.
Oh, that's I think that data so important to helping people recognize this. Beth, I'm getting a little bit of feedback, I think, on your end. I don't know if you have the YouTube link up, but if that would be great. So Beth, I wanted to direct my next question to you. Earlier this month, you testified before the U.S. Senate Finance Committee, and you talked about sort of the unemployment insurance fraud that you're seeing in Iowa. I think this is especially important given the fact that we have as of April, more than 175,000 Iowans who are out of work. And we're seeing lots of reports in the media about scammers trying to steal people's unemployment insurance benefits. Could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing at Iowa Workforce Development with these scams?
Absolutely. So what we are seeing primarily at IWD is identity theft. So individuals are claiming benefits in the name of someone who they are not. We have pretty extensive identifiers and programs in place that require you to verify your identity as you go along. And that's been able to help us prevent a lot of fraud from occurring, but that we're not going to catch every case. I can tell you that we've had 271 claims that were filed using a false identity that we have found. We're investigating a little over 400 and almost 450 still need to be investigated. And we paid out approximately $57,000 in unemployment benefits to individuals who later turned out to not be the people who were filing the claim. On the upside, we have been able to prevent over $3.8 million in claims being paid that were being made by people who were not otherwise entitled to benefits. So we have this is an active part of what we're doing to try to catch and prevent, because it's way easier to stop the money going out than it is to collect it back once it's left the agency.
Yeah, and I can't say enough how much we appreciate what you're doing to stop this kind of fraud. as I mentioned with General Miller, these types of scams are often designed to take people's last dollar. An FTC chairman a few years back talked about these, and he actually, that's what he called them, last dollar scams. And so I really appreciate what you're doing on behalf of Iowans who may be finding themselves in financial distress right now and who are depending on those benefits to help them, pay the rent at the end of the month. So thank you for everything that you're doing. Brad and Beth, you touched a little bit on what you heard General Miller talking about during the first part of our event here today. Are there other things that you heard from his from his chat with me that jumped out at you about scammers using sort of this COVID moment to try and defraud consumers? And if anything jumped out, what was that?
Well, I'll speak out a little bit here because what he said about people being anxious is 100% true. I mean, this is like the Super Bowl for scammers, right? Because there is this heightened sense of anxiety going on related to COVID-19, plus government stimulus dollars. And so, as Director Townsend was saying, when you combine those two things, you can bet that the scammers are going to be after them. And so really, because of this, we are urging people to play defense now more than ever, and what we mean by that is, and I want to just get very, specific here, John, if that's okay with you, because there are some very specific scams out there. Number one is just avoid all offers for vaccinations and tests at this point, because number one, there is no vaccine. I mean, people just need to understand that. You will know when there is a vaccine, right? I mean, you will hear it in the news. It will be big news. Avoid all offers for a vaccine. And as far as testing is concerned, you'll see all these pop-up ads saying free test kits, free home test kits here or there. We are urging consumers to be smart consumers in the sense that be proactive about getting tests. So follow CDC guidelines. Iowa has testiowa.com, where the governor is recommending if you feel like you're symptomatic or just want to see if you need to get a test, go to that website or call your doctor. Don't respond to pop-up ads that are offering free test kits. Stimulus dollars, this is real, because you mentioned in your conversation with Attorney General Miller, there may be a second round. So people need to understand, just don't respond to emails, don't respond to texts, and don't respond to calls, because that is not how the government is going to reach out to you regarding the stimulus payments. So you just need to be, again, very, very much on defense when it comes to protecting those dollars. And finally, I cannot emphasize this enough, and this goes back to that data point on will the IRS ever call you, right? 14% didn't know or thought, yes, they would. They won't. Social Security and the IRS will never call you. And so understand, again, we are in COVID-19. There is a sense of anxiety. Like the general said, people will act now. Your Social Security check or your government stimulus is on the line. You need to respond quickly. You don't. The government, how they communicate is they communicate by mail most of the time. So you just need to understand that. We think, and then lastly, I'll say, if you want to get more information on all these tips that I offered, feel free. I'm going to go plug our Fraud Watch Network, AARP.org/Fraud Watch Network. There's plenty of resources there to protect yourself.
Great, thank you, Brad. I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. Director Townsend, is there anything that jumped out from General Miller's statements that seem really significant to you that you'd like to highlight?
Well, I think when he talked about the need to protect your identity, because right now scammers trying to take advantage of our system only want your name and your Social Security number. They're not trying to get money from you. They're trying to get money on your behalf that they will then keep. And so all they need for you to do is to confirm if they can get a hold of your Social Security number and a name, they can go ahead and file a claim. Now, it may not go through because we have multiple layers of identity that you have to provide. And like Brad said, we'll never call you and ask you to give us your social security number over the phone. When we call you for assistance, we'll verify your information through your name and your address. At most, we only need the last four of your social. So we don't ask for that information either. And if anybody representing themselves as being from Iowa Workforce Development calls and tries to get that information out of you, please don't provide it. Please hang up the phone. Please call our call center and report it. We're trying to stay on top of scams and prevent that from happening. But I think if people can protect their identity, that's going to go a long way to preventing those types of fraudulent claims that we see.
Yes, and we have. I'll Brad plug something, so I'm going to plug another organization that we love. If you have been a victim or think you may have been a victim of identity fraud, there's a great organization called the Identity Theft Resource Center out there that provides counseling on how to go through all the steps you need to do to protect your identity if you've been a victim of identity fraud. Director Townsend, you mentioned, I think, or you or Brad mentioned earlier, the stimulus bill, the CARES Act, and how that works into all the kinds of fraud that we're talking about. I know that it has specific anti-fraud provisions in it, particularly as they relate to unemployment benefits fraud and self-employment. So can you talk a little bit about what you've been seeing in Iowa with regards to unemployment fraud for self-employed Iowans?
Sure. So the CARES Act has very aggressive anti-fraud provisions within it. It's meant to discourage individuals from remaining on unemployment or filing for unemployment when they may not be otherwise eligible. Or in the case of the self-employed, as you just mentioned, it's harder for us to track when you return to work and when you start making money because we don't have your wage records. But don't think for a second that we're not going to audit those. We've had every indication from USDOL that they're going to be fairly aggressive and proactive in terms of making sure that we can verify that everyone we paid this money to for the self-employed were actually self-employed, did not have additional income during the time that they were paid. There's a recognition that the generosity of the benefits creates an incentive to maybe stay on them longer than you otherwise would, and that would be a mistake. Because the CARES Act is very specific about what it defines as fraud and the penalties, and they are going to be high.
And I would just, love to point out too that, somebody who the unemployment insurance fraud is not a victimless crime. So you talked about people might think this is just money from the government, nobody gets hurt. But I know that in a state like Iowa, there is a finite pool of money that's available for people to collect unemployment benefits from. And so if you're thinking that this is something that, it's a way to make a little extra cash, you're not just, hurting the government, you may be hurting your friend or coworker who's depending on those benefits and won't be there because you may have did a little double dipping there. So thank you for raising that important issue.
Well, John, and the other thing I would say I want people to be aware of is that because of the amount of money that's flowing out into the system for unemployment benefits, if it's later determined that you aren't eligible for the benefits you received, you are going to have a huge debt to the state of Iowa. And that means that you won't be eligible most likely to draw unemployment benefits at any time in the future until that debt is repaid. It also means that we can probably get your refunds for state and federal taxes until that debt is paid. And so it's really important to just be totally honest when you're filing these claims and make sure that you're staying current with those claims. So when you go back to work, you're accurately reporting your wages and you're not collecting anything that you're going to have to pay back in the future, because paying it back is going to, for some people that do that, it's going to take a long time and be very painful.
So I think the bottom line there is that the risk of doing this isn't worth it.
That's right.
So Brad, one thing I wanted to raise with you that General Miller talked about was, with regards to seniors specifically, When we're in a time like now where even as sort of we're starting to see, some of these restrictions on gatherings and things like that being lifted, we know that seniors in particular, because of things like underlying health conditions, are still socially isolating, and maybe wary about going out and talking to folks that they would otherwise maybe be able to go to if they got a suspicious phone call in the middle of the night. And this is a concern, even when we're not in COVID times, but particularly we're concerned about it now. And social isolation is something that scammers, very much rely on to try and target seniors in particular. What kind of advice would you give to seniors who may be right now socially isolated, either in their home, in a nursing facility? What can they do to steer clear of these COVID-related scams when they're cut off from their support network?
Yeah, this is a really tricky time for a lot of seniors across the state of Iowa. Social isolation is a real health threat, and it's incredibly unfortunate that we have people that are preying on that sense of social isolation. So I'll give you a good example. I just reached out to our Fraud Watch network to prepare for this show today, this morning, and the person who's in charge of the data said, you know what the number one scam is that we're hearing about right now? Are puppy scams. So I don't know if you've heard about the puppy scams, but it is directly tied to social isolation, because there are now pop-up scams and websites out there claiming to sell puppies to lonely seniors. And so seniors will click on these websites, they will have to do a down payment, and lo and behold, there are no puppies, right? And I think General Miller mentioned romance scams as well. There are these romance scams out there where, again, they're trying to prey on that social isolation and tell you, click on this website, we'll connect you with someone and you'll fall in love and all this stuff. And it's all a way to get your personal information. So we talk about how to protect yourself. It is be a smart consumer. And by this, I just always, I always encourage everyone, when it comes to links that are unexpected that show up in your search engine, when it comes to pop-up ads that show up in your Facebook feeds, ignore them, and if you want a puppy, right, just be proactive and get out there and do a lot of research and find a credible shelter or find a credible breeder out there that is one that will actually deliver what you're looking for. So it's having that sharpened sense of being a proactive consumer and doing your research and your homework. And we were talking about dollars and cents a second ago. So I also want to suggest, if there is a second round of stimulus payments, right? There was one scam out there that was really unbelievable. And this is going to sound crazy, but you have to know what the physical check is going to look like. Okay, so again, go online and do your research. So one example of this is there was a scam that said, okay, here's your stimulus check. It's for cars. It was from a car dealership that were trying to get people to come on their lot with a fake check for over $3,000, saying they were from the government. And then they get people on their lot and they try and sell them used cars. So the FTC shut this scam down, but it was claiming to be a federal stimulus check, and the check looked real, but it wasn't real, because when you compare it to the actual check, it was a fake one. So just encouraging people to go online and do a lot of homework, especially in these times.
Great, Brett, that's so important to raise that issue. We're going to start transitioning to the end of our event here, but before we do, Director Townsend, we do have one question from our online audience, and what they write is, they say, Director Townsend mentions that people who file fraudulently will be penalized. What about people whose benefits were stolen by a fraudster? Can they get their money back eventually?
Well, if I filed a claim and said that I was John and I received John's money, it's the state and the federal government that are out that money. John is not out that money. And if John needed to file a claim and then showed us that in fact he never received any of the money or benefits that I received pretending to be John, then he would go back to zero and he would be entitled to all of his benefits. So when someone files in your name, once we establish that that was a fraudulent claim, you are completely, all of that is removed from your record and you start from ground zero.
Great, but I think you would probably agree that it would still be a huge headache for whoever is depending on that money.
Well, and it would be a big concern because if they're filing in your name here, they're probably using your name to file in other states, because other states it's easier to get through and get claims. And what we've noticed with the fraudsters nationwide is most states are paying claims as quickly as possible. And so fraudsters have decided it's easier and faster to file bulk fraudulent claims. Maybe I'll only get a week or two worth of benefits, but if I get, if I can walk away with $1 million in a week and then they cut it off, I don't care. I've made $1 million. So there was the state of Washington actually had to shut down their unemployment system for 3 days because there was a Nigerian group that was on the hook to get paid over $300 million in fraudulent claims, and they were able to prevent that. So yeah, they keep up with how to do this quickly and easily, and they are constantly adapting.
Yeah, I think I once said, talking about these organized criminal gangs, that they seem to be as networked and savvy as any Fortune 500 company out there. So
Yeah.
they definitely know what they're doing. So we're coming up on the end of our time with you. I'm just going to ask Brad and Beth, are there any closing remarks, anything that you want to leave our audience knowing before we end today's event?
Well, I would encourage anyone who believes that or finds out that their identity has been stolen, that they let us know. If they receive any information in the mail from us, because we do send out written notice when claims are made and they don't know what it's related to because they know they haven't filed an unemployment claim, please reach out and let us know that this is not a claim that you filed, that someone's using your information, and we can lock that claim immediately and then get it cleared up and taken off of your account. So if you find any indication that someone's using your name or identity, please let us know. That's information that's very valuable and important to us. Great. And what's the website that people can use to do that? You can just go to iowaworkforcedevelopment.gov. We have a COVID-19 page, and it's got all the phone numbers and all the information you would need to be able to do that. Great. Thank you, Director Townsend. Brad, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And again, great to be with you, Director Townsend. Appreciate everything you said. Amazing information about Washington. I didn't realize they had to shut down their whole system. So my closing arguments would be to, again, just be on high alert, because it's not just the testing, it's not just the vaccine scams, there are a lot of scams also just indirectly tied to COVID that are showing up. So there was one door-to-door salesman selling air duct cleaning in Iowa because you need COVID air duct cleaning. You don't, right? Go online, research it. The puppy scams are another example. So, and I do want to just reemphasize what Director Miller said about the importance of reporting. Contact the FTC. There's also, if you do get a phishing scam from the IRS that you believe is suspicious, you can contact phishing, that's PHISHING, at irs.gov. You can send that scam to the IRS, and that will help prevent others from being scammed as well. So again, great information. I learned a lot, and really thank you, John, for doing this today.
Great. Well, thank you, and thank you to you both for the amazing work that you're doing on behalf of consumers and workers in Iowa in particular. But I think the messages that you've shared today are applicable not just to Iowans, but across the country. And again, thanks to General Miller for taking time out on a Thursday to be with us. To our audience out there on YouTube, this video will be available, a recorded version of this for as far in the future as you want to watch it. But if you are looking for more information about COVID-19 scams or to report it, I would encourage you to report them to the great organizations who have been on this call, as well as to NCL. And the website for that is www.fraud.org. So again, Brad, Director Townsend, thank you so much for making time for our event today. Be safe, be well, and we'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Good to see you, Brad.
Good to see you. Thank you.